I had my first venture-backed startup, and I started having panic attacks. And I didn't just have imposter syndrome. I think at that point, I kind of was an imposter. I got there a little quicker than I was ready for. You know what I mean? And it was weighing on me. We have a government filled with imposters. The weight of that is going to be heavy. It is hard to pretend to know how to run the FBI when you have no freaking idea how to run the FBI. So I imagine, these kind of personal crises that we're seeing in Hegseth and RFK and Kash Patel now are going to continue. And this is like the cost of putting unqualified people in certain positions.
Well, and I got the sense, Xander, from Kash Patel's comments over the weekend that he is very worried about his position. And
of course, that's how he takes it. These guys are all me. I'm worried about me. No, you're running the FBI, man. We're all worried about the FBI being run. The issue isn't, will Kash Patel keep being an important guy? It's always how they think, man. It's so frustrating.
Well, and it seems like he's gone back to the well of Donald Trump's biggest bugaboo, which is whether the 2020 election was stolen from him. And he told Fox News that the FBI has, just after these allegations against him, Kash Patel, he says, well, the FBI's got information backing Donald Trump's claims that the 2020 election was stolen. And he hinted that more could be coming soon. Take a look.
Just keep me on for a little while longer.
About the mission, because every time I see President Trump, he says this repeatedly, that the election was rigged in 2020. I mean, he says it all the time. We all know that. And it's almost getting lost because he says it so much. You've been at the FBI now 14 months. Have you done anything about that? And do you have anything to tell us about that?
We have found all this information. We are working with our Department of Justice partners, and I am never going to let this go, because they not only have personally attacked the presidency of the United States and President Trump, but they tried to thwart our elections and rig the entire system. And that is not something that is going to stop on it. That is not something I'm going to allow on my watch. But you just have to remember, they built this disease temple over 20 and 30 years. We've got all the evidence. I can announce on your show that we've got all the information we need. We're working with our prosecutors at the Department of Justice and their Attorney General Todd Blanche, and we are going to be making arrests, and it's coming, and I promise you, it's coming soon.
Well,
he feels badass saying that. You can tell. He's like, yeah.
Keep me on the job just long enough to make some lawless arrests of innocent people, to sketch a story of how they stole the 2020 election. I just want to point out, nowhere in that description was there any reference to who they is. Who is they? I've been waiting 6 years to find out who the they was that stole the 2020 election.
That's the name of Jason Stanley's book, right? Is The Politics of Us and Them. Is that's how fascism works. And that's a great example. There's a mysterious they that's working against us, and you've got to defeat them. That's how these guys function. Early front runner for Soulmate Award, I think. Kash Patel making a move early in the week.
He wants those shoes. Well, he's going to make some arrests, he says, maybe this week. I'll look out the window. I don't see anyone yet, but
they can't keep going back to Comey. They got to get some new blood in there.
Yeah, maybe Xander. I was a part of a criminal conspiracy to steal the 2020 election that I'm not aware of. But it sounds like some innocent people are about to be pursued by our government. And what I will say is this: in all seriousness, we won't forget that. We won't forget that there is this obviously threadbare effort at the U.S. Department of Justice and at the FBI to paint a fake story of conspirators who stole the 2020 election from Donald Trump. You lost, dude. You lost the damn election. Shut up. Shut up. You lost 100%. The election. You can't go arrest people because you lost the election. And
60 plus courts said you did. That's right. Already been flooded. We've already had this fight.
And if you go arrest people that are innocent and you do it intentionally to get revenge, that's illegal. We're not going to forget that. We're not going to forget any of these people. I hope they know it. Well, there's another issue, Xander, that we won't forget. And that's what's happening in Iran, because the dysfunction we've seen with the FBI doesn't just stay contained to one single agency. It shows up at the very tippy top. And on Saturday, the Wall Street Journal let drop that this is something that is actively having to be combated in crucial moments of war. More specifically, Donald Trump himself was kept out of key Situation Room discussions as aides allegedly worked through the recent rescue of 2 downed airmen in Iran earlier this month. Why? Well, according to that reporting, because they believed that Donald Trump's impatience and impulsiveness would be unhelpful in a moment that required precision. Sounds very familiar to me. When Donald Trump learned of this situation, he, quote, screamed at aides for hours on how European leaders weren't helping on gas prices and fears of repeated failures like the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis coming to fruition. He reportedly demanded that forces go in immediately, overlooking the dangerous fact that the United States had not been on Iranian soil since the hostage crisis, and planning to do so would take time and effort and resources. So instead, he was given updates after those decisions were made related to the hostage rescue. That is, by the way, folks, the President of the United States being sidelined during an active military situation. And that disconnect is also being seen on the world stage. Right now, the ceasefire between the United States, Iran, and Israel is hanging in the balance. Why? Well, it seems like the same impetuous and impulsive man that the military had to keep out of the Situation Room is still managing this conflict. Over the weekend, Iran targeted ships in the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. responded by boarding an Iranian vessel attempting to break through the naval blockade. And as a result, the strait itself remains effectively shut. Diplomatic talks are stalled. Just before we came on the air, it was reported that the Iranians have bailed on those talks. New negotiations are still expected, possibly in Pakistan, but neither side has formally committed to returning to the table. And again, reporting suggests that the Iranians have turned down coming back to the table. But other signals, which there are some, are not encouraging. While Trump extended the deadline for an agreement to be reached from Tuesday night to Wednesday night, he signaled today that another extension is highly unlikely. Meanwhile, Iranian officials are warning that any miscalculation by the United States would trigger what they are calling final chastisement. The country's president says Iran has a, quote, deep historical mistrust of the United States and will not submit to force. I'm going to bring Xander back into the conversation here. Xander, do you think that Donald Trump is setting up another taco moment here? I mean, in the past day or so, he's gone back to threatening extraordinary destruction, fire and fury, the whole thing. Are we going to see a continued taco, or is he going to, on the other hand, go commit what appear to be obvious war crimes? Oh, you're muted.
So my options are president lying and chickening out, or war crimes. Those were the two.
Taco or war crimes are the only options you get.
He might have out-tacoed himself, because I can't tell at this point which thing he'd be backing down from. Like, are we co-managing the strait with Iran? Are we obliterating Iran? Are we now ushering in world peace? I no longer remember what his original thing he was trying to do was. Are we regime change? Are we creating peace with this regime? I don't know. I've lost, there was never a plot, and I've lost, his version of the plot too many times to know even what he would be backing out of at this point.
I mean, it's a tough situation to be in, because none of us want to mock Trump for tacoing when the he's chickening out from is slaughtering innocent civilians, right? You don't want to you don't want to go to him and say, well, you're just a chicken. You're not man enough to do it. No, we don't want you to do it. You're a psychopath. But it's extraordinary that that's the debate that we have to have. And Xander, I've got to say, some of this felt a little validating when I read the story. I wrote about it a little bit. I happened to talk about how Donald Trump was so unstable in moments of life and death. We felt like, surprise, we couldn't trust him, because he would upend the situation. He would bring distractions and impulsiveness into the room. And yeah, it sounds like while we were, as a country, trying to rescue these downed airmen, that the U.S. military felt the same way. You know what? It's not going to be very helpful to have the president in the room barking orders, throwing out random ideas, putting lives on the ground in danger. It hasn't gotten better. The man hasn't gotten better at his job. If you happen to be someone who's listening to the program right now and you're like, but I believe in President Trump. He's now been president 2 terms and he's got this thing under control. He doesn't. So who do you respect more? Members of the United States military willing to risk their lives for you, or Donald Trump, who bone spurred his way out of war? Who do you trust? Because the ones who are serving in uniform are saying, we can't trust this guy in life and death moments. That's what's happening, Xander. And unfortunately, this conflict is not over. So we have to worry again this week if it's going to be like the week before last when Donald Trump was threatening genocide.
How close are we to the next Nobel Prize? Can we float that again? Is that back on the table? Can he start petitioning that? Can we get those 5 academic Swedes or whoever they are on board?
I don't know
to help us get this done this time around.
It's going to be hard to give him that award after his truth.
He started all of it. I don't care. Who cares? I don't care. If it's what he needs to freaking do what's right and not commit war crimes, we can eat it and rectify the situation later.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what's on the citation. I think we've got Trump's Truth Social freak out from over the weekend. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe this will be in the Nobel Prize citation. I'm winning a war by a lot. That's
how they measure wars. A lot or a little.
Well, yeah. Our military has been amazing. And if you read the fake news, like the failing New York Times, the absolutely horrendous and disgusting Wall Street Journal, or the now almost defunct, fortunately, Washington Post, you would actually think we are losing.
We're running out of publications. There used to be like truly left-leaning publications. The Journal's owned by Rupert Murdoch, and the Post is owned by Bezos.
Yeah. And
we're really running out of publications.
The failing New York Times, I think, has quadrupled in size since he started calling it the failing New York Times. I mean,
nice talkie moment for the New York Times. They've had a talkie decade, really.
That's right. As a reminder, talkie is Xander's term. Trump always creates idols, and he's not wrong. When Trump attacks, he seems to create idols. But extraordinary. You know what's kind of funny about the thing you said about the Nobel Prize? I think back to North Korea when Trump's first cabinet was so terrified that he was going to accidentally get us into a nuclear war with North Korea, which I think when I used to say that, people would say, yeah, you're probably just saying that, right? It can't have been that bad. And now that we're living through Iran, people are like, oh, I get it. Okay, so he actually was that close to starting another war. And their solution was basically to redirect Trump to write love letters to Kim Jong-un. It was like, well, why don't you negotiate with him? And why don't you fly to North Korea? And why don't you, which is something that was anathema to everyone in conservative foreign policy circles. We would have never recommended go negotiate with this murderous despot. Do not honor him with setting an American president's foot on his soil. But you know what? It's a lot better than Donald Trump getting us into a nuclear war. Yeah, you know what? Write him love letters. You fly around the world and go have meetings with him. Fall in love with him for all we care. Just don't blow up the world.
I mean, he feels like a very easy person to manipulate, but you were on the inside kind of trying to do that. Where does that fall short? Like, that is the 4D chess move, is like, this is what Putin's doing, right? Putin's like, this guy's incredibly easy to manipulate. You just got to make him feel good and loved and important, and he'll basically do whatever you want. Trying to manipulate's maybe too strong of a word, but trying to push him towards doing non-destructive things. Where does that eventually fall short, Miles, when you and your allies were in there trying to guide the country in the right direction?
Well, I mean, look, the saying that always stuck with me was, when saying no is no longer enough, you got to move on and do something else. And I felt like for the first year and a half of the Trump administration, he was so uncertain of this giant thing, the government, that he knew nothing about. He didn't know anything about the Constitution, didn't know any of it. That when he was told no, he was begrudgingly deferential. But then Donald Trump just started to, grow into this much more defiant character and say, you know what, I don't care if you say that it's illegal. I'm president. Right. I say it's legal, and therefore it's legal. I mean, that was his attitude. It goes back to that. What was that famous Nixon quote when, Nixon said something like, when the president says it is legal. Donald Trump has said that like 20 times in more dramatic fashion. And, and then he did what he often does, which is the people who challenged him and I don't mean challenged him for power, the people who challenged the legality of his actions, he just got rid of him. He just got rid of him, which actually maybe that's something that's happening right now, because we just got breaking news that the labor secretary of the Trump administration, Lori Chavez Durham, has resigned from the administration. This is according to NBC News. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez Durham will be leaving the administration to take a position in the private sector, Donald Trump's spokesperson Stephen Chung said. She has done a phenomenal job in her role by protecting American workers, enacting fair labor practices, and helping Americans gain additional skills. Chavez Durham had been facing a probe from the department's inspector general for potential misconduct. That investigation has already resulted in multiple of her top staffers being placed on administrative leave and ultimately leaving their posts. Xander, this is one that's been swirling around for a couple of days, which is the possibility that Trump may be tossing another cabinet member. Now, it's not for the reasons that I said earlier of her standing up to the president. It's because she's been beset by controversy. And it's something that Donald Trump has been focusing on, is throwing a number of the women in his cabinet out who have been controversial. Of course, he got rid of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. He's been reported to be thinking about getting rid of Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard because she reportedly opposed the war in Iran. And now he's tossed out his labor secretary. Such a surprise that there would be so much corruption inside the Trump administration that Donald Trump would have to throw someone out for purportedly being tied to corruption.
If you weren't sure if these folks were misogynist and racist, if we could have some sort of collage of all the people they've let go over the last month, which is all the black generals, all of the women in the cabinet, etc., even their peers and allies, they're the first to go. So more evidence. The Labor Department was in a tough spot. Remember, the statistician was fired for reporting, honest to God, jobs loss numbers or at least low growth numbers. I think that was last year. That was kind of in the early days of the Trump administration, but they were in a weird spot right away almost.
Yeah. Think about that. That should have been a reason to throw the labor secretary overboard, is basically rigging the jobs numbers. No. Donald Trump liked that. What he apparently didn't like are these allegations, which, for anyone who's not been following it, there have been allegations that she pursued a sexual relationship with a subordinate, even though she has denied those allegations. But people have already been put on leave or fired from the department, including the secretary's chief of staff, the deputy, placed on administrative leave, and then ultimately forced to resign. Her director of advance, that's the team that goes out before the secretary goes to an event and make sure it's prepared, make sure that security's right, was then placed on leave and fired. And there's just been this cascade over recent weeks, which Politico reported resulted in Trump getting very frustrated that the situation wasn't resolving. So, I don't think Trump cares a great deal about the labor secretary, at least in my experience in the first term. He didn't spend a lot of time with his labor secretary. It's a position he's tended to give to someone to check a box. In the first term, it was Alex Acosta for a period of time. I think. I remember that. Who was tied, of course, to the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, and then it was I forget, son of a former Supreme Court justice. But anyway, point being, there's not a job that Trump cares a whole lot about, and he's got a lot of people whose backs he wants to scratch, Xander, in the rest of this second term. So he's only got so many cabinet jobs to open up.
Was this a TMZ story? I feel like TMZ got to DC and there's been like 9 sex scandals that have been out since then. I didn't know if TMZ's immediately doing incredible investigative work surfacing these things, but it feels like there's this onslaught of these types of scandals, like drinking, like personal behavior scandals, cash drinking, this type of stuff. It's interesting. I don't know if they're behind all of it, but it feels like it's ratcheted up significantly since they got to DC.
They just find all of them, don't they? Well, I'm going to jump to our next story before we speak to our guest, Xander. And we have with us today, our guest that we were going to have with us last week is former top Joe Biden economist, Wes Lin. And we'll get to Wes in just a moment. But for our final segment, I want to talk about something that affects all of us, because starting today, the Trump administration is obligated by a Supreme Court ruling to begin reimbursing businesses for Donald Trump's tariffs. But here's the catch. Those refunds are going to companies, not the people who actually paid the price. Because while tariffs are charged to importers, those costs were passed directly onto you, the consumers, through higher prices at the checkout. And now, even as more than $160 billion is being paid back, there's no mechanism to return that money to the public. In fact, officials have made it clear they don't expect consumers to see any of it. As Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, put it bluntly, quote, "I got the feeling the American people won't see it." And that's only adding to a much bigger issue, because across the country, we're seeing growing pressure around wealth and inequality. And what a perfect example of that than the Trump administration creating tariffs that resulted in $160 billion taken out of the pockets of the American people, and then, in the end, handed back to the companies and not the people. Well, according to recent reporting, states are now moving to tax their highest earners, with new millionaires' taxes spreading beyond major markets and into smaller states trying to rebalance their budgets. This is one of the many signs that the gap between those who benefit under the Trump administration and who pays is getting harder to ignore. And now, even billionaires are starting to feel that pressure. Take Elon Musk, for instance. Over the weekend, Musk began promoting what he calls universal high income, a play off of the term universal basic income, a version of direct government payments to Americans as a way to deal with job losses he anticipates from artificial intelligence. Now, this is, of course, from someone who has spent years pushing for smaller government and now suddenly arguing that the system may need to step in. And he's not alone. We're seeing more conversations like this coming from inside the Donald Trump billionaire class, including in this clip from the podcast All In, a podcast with millionaire billionaire cast, including David Friedberg, who had this to say.
You own assets like we do. The four of us, we own stocks, we own real estate, we own other assets. As the dollar devalues and everything inflates in value, our asset prices go up and we get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. The majority of Americans do not own assets. They are net asset negative. As a result, they live off of income. And they do not benefit from the de-dollarization like asset holders do. And this is what is ultimately fueling populism in the United States. And the populism in the United States is what is driving socialism. And the response to those behaviors is what Donald Trump elected to some degree. And the response to the Donald Trump actions is what's driving the civil unrest in Minnesota and other places. And I fundamentally believe that much of the unrest, the civil unrest, and ultimately this divide in this country is driven by the fact that de-dollarization, because of excess government spending, ultimately leads a majority of people in this country to feeling oppressed and left behind because they're seeing a few people in the country accelerate their net worth, like all of us here, and there's no way for them to catch up because they don't actually own assets. So I'll be honest with you guys and make a confession. I was at the gym this morning on the treadmill.
You were at the gym?
Yeah. And while I was there, I was actually thinking about the wealth tax stuff that's going on in California. And I wonder if it may be an inevitability in order to keep the United States from going into civil war. I mean that very wholeheartedly. Like, I just don't know if there's a way of solving this fiscal problem without a functional redistribution of wealth. And the question is, can you do it violently or non-violently? And if there's a non-violent path, I think that's probably the preferable path.
Do you ever think about violently picking up some of those weights?
We can leave that in.
Why is he roasting him about going to the gym on top of it?
Joining us, Xander, to give his reaction and expertise is Wesley Yin. Wesley is a professor of economics at UCLA and former chief economist at the White House Office of Management and Budget. Wes, welcome to the program, my friend. Great to have you with us.
Hey.
Glad to be here. Can you hear me okay?
We got you. Wes, I want to get your reaction to that. Look, and I say this as a lifelong conservative, wealth redistribution is like naughty words in conservative circles, but it is so striking to me how nervous you are starting to see some folks in the Trump, Epstein, millionaire, billionaire class getting about what is happening in society. There's an anxiousness. And I saw that with, Musk's comments about universal high income. I was like, wow, he's already riffing off of UBI to UHI, whatever that is, because this anxiety is growing. What do you make of all of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also because the wealthy in America also see that it actually makes sense at this point to raise taxes on the wealthy. I mean, it's not just about pure redistribution as it once was. The people coming for the pitchforks because they think it's unfair. We can't have a functioning economy at this point with the types of fiscal imbalances that we're seeing. The CBO puts out these deficit projections, and it's not that we have to get on a better path right now to avoid some future problem. Our current path right now is unsustainable. So I think those who the wealthy, they see that. We have these big deficits. We have huge obligations coming up. AI is probably only going to exacerbate that as we, have greater labor income inequality, with more demands on public services that might come about. And I think it's just inevitable that we need some sort of taxation for having a functioning economy. So they see that. So it's a real possibility, but we're in the death throes of the current system. So I'm not sure which way it's going to go.
Yeah, totally. Well, I wanted to pick your brain on this. The guy on the podcast used like a million words to say people are becoming too poor and we're becoming too rich. But I do think one thing he said, what he pointed out correctly, was that part of the rise of Trump was because of what's going on. And there was like this thesis behind, this globalization, this economic globalization with America at the center that kind of failed on two fronts. One, all of our rivals didn't turn into allies. You think about the rise of China becoming a superpower, and they're not less autocratic or more aligned with us than they were previously. And then this vision that Americans would upskill out of kind of hard labor into white collar work and then be okay. And I think some of what the Trump base was reacting to was kind of the unrealization of that promise that they were going to get better jobs one day, and that was on the horizon. That promise kind of broke. We've seen Trump's hypothesis to how to fix that, right? Tariff the world, and we're going to reindustrialize America. Your union jobs are going to come back and whatnot. That hasn't happened. I just wonder, when someone like you who's thought so long and hard about these challenges, what were the things that America, in an alternate universe, Wesley Yin's advising another president, and he's taking on your advice to solve these issues that are driving populism, as I think the podcaster correctly pointed out. What should we be thinking about doing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot to unpack there. First of all, it's the guy who mentioned the rise of these issues. He put everything on de-dollarization. I mean, that's one aspect of it, but there's so many components of that I think that he doesn't want to touch. Right? There's growing corporate market power, right, and across a lot of industries, whether it's tech, whether it's healthcare, food. I mean, you have all these cases of food and agriculture, where there's oligopolistic price gouging and price fixing. There's so many aspects of this in the tax system as well, where you just see a lot of political power leading to a tax system that is just highly unequal and favors capital over labor in really egregious ways. So he's focusing on dollar de-dollarizations, but a lot of this movement comes from all aspects of the typical person's lived experience in the economy, right? So it's the labor markets, it's wage suppression, it's the outsourcing of labor, it's the rising market power of corporations, the tax system. So it's on all fronts that the typical American is experiencing what used to be, fighting hard to make ends meet now becomes a feeling of this is just very unfair.
Yeah.
Now, when I think back to like what you said with the rise of the Trump movement, you know what? There's also the rise of the Bernie movement. Those two things could have been like really well aligned if not for the issue of white Christian nationalism, right? I mean, that thing basically just split this populist movement into something that could be, you know, like a broader movement, and that's you know, that's a pretty divisive thing in the modern political landscape here. So with that said, I mean, you know, clearly tariffs aren't the way to go, right? That's not to say that there isn't like a role for tariffs. Like, it's funny about Trump. Trump has this knack for identifying a core problem. There's a nugget of truth in there. And there's also a nugget of truth in the solution. Like, I'm all for strategic, well thought out tariffs, right? If we want to like defend, there could be like, you know, national security issues. There's choke points that we have to become resilient to. I'm all for putting money towards strategic investments there that's combined with the tariff, and it's very tailored, thoughtful, and strategic. 3 adjectives that you don't commonly use for this administration. But there is a nugget of truth there. You can see why people hang on to it, right? Yeah. So, you know, more broadly, I think, you know, the left and the economists also kind of maybe didn't get it completely right with, you know, we just have free trade. And, you know, prices go down, welfare goes up. I don't think that we understood enough about how that is coinciding with offshoring, what that does to regional economics, what that does to when it's, you know, when prices come down and some people become disemployed, you know, we also don't have the other investments from the gains in the society to reinvest in the people.
Right.
And so we lose all of that. And so I think we get this movement in response to that.
Wes, I want to ask you about something that I think is sort of a good news story in all of this. It's the first time in my life that I've seen the potential for bringing together the far left of the political spectrum and the far right in a classical sense, the hardcore libertarians. I mean, you know, for so long, and this is exemplified in my and Xander's friendship, you know, for so long, I'll cite Milton Friedman and Xander will say, screw Milton Friedman, you know, we go head to head. But this was something that even the libertarians like Friedman were supportive of. I mean, you know, he called it, I think, a negative income tax, but it was essentially the idea of UBI, universal basic income. And of course, you know, Andrew Yang really popularized that in politics in the presidential election a number of years back. But this is now, especially during this administration, where the delta is so obvious. You got a president building ballrooms with the money from billionaires who run the companies, whose backs he's scratching. I mean, it's so in your face that you now have Democrats and some Republicans saying, gosh, we may have to think very seriously about some version of universal basic income. And for people who don't know what UBI is, it's just the idea of your government giving you basically a straight cash transfer that's like, look, here's your basic income as a floor. I wonder what you think, Wes, about what happens after this administration. Do you think I'm being, you know, too idealistic about this, or do you think there is perhaps a growing political coalition around some sort of dramatic welfare reform to meet the moment in the age of AI?
Yeah, and I think a lot depends on what happens with AI. And I think that as UBI becomes more normalized, I think we need it to be more normalized so that in the moment, it's not a pie in the sky idea, but it's something that's been socialized across the gestalt of the political language and the vocabulary around it. Because if it's still considered, you know, pie in the sky, it's not going to be in the moment. And I think things might change quite rapidly with AI. I mean, in some sense, we already have universal basic blank, right? And that is on the healthcare side, it's a little bit stronger. And that's really where we have the most strength there. But I think we're really going to have to contend with this with the onset of AI and as it progresses and changes the labor markets.
I think. Well, I was just going to say, I think it'd be quite remarkable if, of the things that we got out of Donald Trump's destructive wrecking ball approach to our government, the fact that he's been so corrupt, if it gets us something like UBI that unifies the right and the left, that will be an unintentional gift from Donald Trump to future generations.
Yeah, and this is, I think you're thinking the same way I was thinking about, my comment before about Trump and Bernie, right? I mean, there's this odd bedfellows that is rooted in the same types of populism and economic disempowerment. But I think the solution is just very different. But I think they're identifying some of the core issues here. And then I also like what you mentioned about, there's some common grounds between the left and the right here. And I think about it from like the econ perspective, where we've traditionally thought of, any government intervention in any matters, of course, that's really bad for the economy. Our markets, from taxations to private markets here, whether it's like on the business side with corporate power, to the tax side when there's just so much political power behind like really inefficient and allocatively inefficient taxation that favors, the loopholes on capital gains essentially. Like intervening in these markets or in the tax world, like making it fair is actually more efficient at this point. It's so unfair now. It's so unfair now where any movement towards fair is actually more efficient.
Same thing with antitrust, right? The antitrust laws have totally failed under these guys, which the antitrust was about market competition. It was about increasing. It's not misaligned with like a Milton Friedman thesis, for example.
Exactly. And that's what I was invoking totally, Xander, like on the market power side.
Yeah.
Interventions on this side brings us towards greater fairness and greater efficiencies. And that's not even the goal. I mean, the goal isn't for more competition. The goal is for a more productive, fruitful, fair, growing society, prosperous society. Fair markets is one way to get there, but we need other things as well. But we're so far on the other side of that right now.
Wesley, I feel bad for you because I feel like we got a great chief economist on here, and we're just asking you the biggest, hardest questions. We're like, okay, solve labor in the age of AI. I've got another one for you. Small question. You're advising Trump, right? He's now engulfed the world in this war that is driving up oil prices. And which, as you know better than us, bleeds into the prices of everything and has the potential to have like this domino effect into other crises, like insurance crisis that lead into, financial crisis or whatnot. We were kind of slightly messing around at the beginning of the show, talking about what's his options here. What do you think the best options are for him? If somehow you got the man to listen to you and follow your lead, what are our best options to get out of this conflict in the right way and with the minimum amount of damage to our economy and the global economy?
All right. No, this is getting into
small question.
This is getting like geoeconomics, which is, I like to think about as the armchair geoeconomics.
Come on, Wes, solve wealth inequality for us on this podcast, and then solve the war.
All right. Okay. So when I think about Israel, U.S., Iran right now, I think some of the issues are okay. There's sensible things of what I think are the pressure points that Trump is facing. So I think Trump would actually like sign on to some deal that balances. Like, what are the key things that he wants? He wants to limit the potential that Iran has nuclear weapons. Some sort of win on the Straits and the control of the Straits. He might even be willing to give up, sanctions if he can get some of these things. So there's some scope here where Iran and the U.S. might come to some agreement. I think some of the challenges here are that there's ego involved here, right? He wants to get some deal that is like he can say is better than what Obama did, and I think that drives a lot of this, right? There's also kind of like the wild card here, which is on the Israeli side. I think the line that Netanyahu would want to draw is actually quite a bit higher.
More aggressive, yeah.
Much more aggressive. It's not just on nuclear. It's also on missile technologies and missile capacities, because they bear the brunt of that and the U.S. doesn't.
Sure.
So a little wild card here in that little cone of agreement that Iran and the U.S. might face. I mean, I think the bar that Israel has is a little bit higher. And then, how does Netanyahu manipulate Trump in that way? These are some of the wild cards here. But I think if there's somewhere in that cone, I think Trump would come to some agreement there. He just has to walk out and say, you know what, Obama was terrible. I did a better job than him, and give me my Nobel Prize. I mean, that's what he wants, right?
I'm glad you agree with my strategy of bringing the Nobel Prize into this.
Oh, totally. If we can give the man a Nobel Prize, right? I mean, it diminishes the value of all past and future Nobel Prize winners.
Yeah,
but that's
all
a
right.
small cost to pay.
I want future Nobel Prize winners to exist.
Yeah,
so if it allows us to continue to exist, that's fine by me.
And let's have a DOJ that isn't a Gestapo anymore.
Yeah, a lot of good that we can give them the Nobel Prize the next year. The Nobel Prize, whoever picks the award.
But
I agree with the folks who say that
the value isn't as high the next time around.
Yeah. I agree with the folks who say if he resigned today, it would instantly earn him a Nobel Prize, and that probably would, given everything that he's done. Wes, it's great to have you with us, my friend. I hope you will join us again next time. Xander and I are going to try to think up questions that are even bigger that you might be able to solve for us. We appreciate you coming on, my friend, and your insights. And hopefully we've got some good economic news to talk about on the back end of this, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about whatever news comes out.
Awesome. Wesley Yin, former chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget during the Biden administration at the White House, former member of the Council of Economic Advisors, and professor at UCLA. Thank you for joining us.
Take care. Thanks for having me on.
Take care. Oh, Xander, I think we solved it, man.
Well, we should have asked them harder questions. We could ask them to solve the Fermi paradox. or some other questions on why there isn't more life across the universe. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like we've been thinking about so many of these questions for so long, and then got like the expert on board that we couldn't just get granular about today's news.
Can't get granular.
He's the best. He's the best. He's great. Yeah.
Take down the big issues for us, man. No, that was good. I put on my cap, Xander, because you know what time it is.
Who's joining the Defiance time?
It's who's joining the Defiance.
Let's go. Minus my red alert thing. I took it back to a room, so I don't have it today.
What a great toy. I can't even believe you kept it for as long as you did on your desk.
That's true.
Well, we go into our final segment of the day and every day, which is who is joining the Defiance in this country. And today we're not necessarily showcasing a person who's joining the Defiance, but rather an event that happened today, because just hours ago, veterans and military families gathered in Washington, D.C., calling on the Trump administration to end the war in Iran. Around 150 people took part in the protest, including a symbolic flag folding to honor those who have already died. However, what started as a peaceful protest has resulted in arrests made by Capitol Police, many of which are disabled veterans. Take a look. Well, so you see there's, Xander, they sort of did a sit-in.
Yeah. It really, watching that, it really validates our strategy from a few weeks ago of funding independent veterans. Like, you just see the credibility, even a few of them, dozens of them bring to any sort of argument about whether there should or shouldn't be a war. It's so different than, I don't know, a coastal guy like me going and complaining about it. Just the credibility, and they've all lived it. They've all understood that there isn't kind of this like masculine glory in these conflicts. There's no winners. Everyone comes out a loser when we engage in taking human life, and it's just really powerful to see. And I'm proud of the Defiance members and this club for leaning into that strategy. And we're going to continue, as long as there's a war going on, we're going to continue to find ways to lean into that strategy and find credible messengers that can drive this point home.
Yeah, and in fact, we'll be overdue in the not too distant future for an update from our friend Paul Reichoff at Independent Veterans of America, who Defiance.org members supported and funded as part of their efforts to push back. And if you haven't been following Paul, he has not been resting on his loyal
busy boy.
Yeah, he has been busy. He has been out there pushing very hard on this. And of course, very grateful for the support of all of you who have been helping IVA in their efforts to make sure veterans have a voice in telling this administration end this conflict. And if you read the reporting over the weekend, it sounds like Trump is extremely anxious about the war continuing. And I think there was a New York Times deep dive over the weekend about how the president is growing increasingly anxious and paranoid about the idea of putting ground troops in, and at the same time almost boxing himself into it because he can't cut a deal and he keeps escalating and he doesn't know how to de-escalate, and he's torn by these internal impulses to create more leverage against Iran by sending troops in who could potentially be sitting ducks if they tried to take some of the targets.
No one wants
that have been considered by this administration. No one wants that.
Stick a fork in him.
Donald Trump, that's right. Donald Trump just barreling towards that possibility, including as recently as today, seemingly ratcheting up the rhetoric rather than trying to find a solution. Let's take some questions from Defiance.org members. Xander, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just I'm hanging out with my brother-in-law after this podcast. He's a 3-time Trump voter, former or he's a veteran, served for 8 years and voted for Trump for No More Forever Wars. He's more livid than I am about what's going on. When we get together, he's leading the conversation about what's going on. There's so many people like him that feel so deeply betrayed. And if you're mixing it up in those communities, it's really, really apparent. That's not a niche or fringe stance to have at this point among those people.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right, my friend. Well, give him our best, and we'll take his voice in the fight too. I want to take a couple of questions from Defiance.org members before we jump, Xander. Trisha Robbins says, how best to address people once they realize or begin to feel that they have been had? This is something that you have talked to a lot of folks about, Xander, which is the fact that one of the messages that's really resonant to those 2- and 3-time Trump voters is that they're being taken advantage of. And a lot of them now, a lot of them, like by the tens of millions, are waking up to the fact that they are being taken advantage of by this administration, and that Donald Trump is building ballrooms and making billions while they are being taxed by his tariffs and they won't get that money back. I mean, people are getting pretty pissed off about this. What are the ways to break through to that audience? How do you think they get that message? And perhaps you might say that some already are, that those masses are waking up. What were the effective tactics to wake them up?
Yeah. Well, we had Garrett Cathcart on here a few months ago from More Perfect Union, who does a lot of persuasion work. And he did it while he was deployed in Iraq as well. And he calls it 3T diplomacy, which basically means build a friendship and listen. Before you start organizing them towards your thing, build a friendship and listen. And within those listening sessions, also extend a lot of olive branches. I mean, Wesley just nailed it in our previous interview. We said a lot of Trump voters and Bernie voters actually had very similar concerns and frustrations. And so to the point, you can be someone who validates their concerns and understands their motivations. That creates a level of kind of safety and trust within a relationship that then you can begin to organize, what they call organizing the political world. And so, this is more like Jonathan Haidt human psychology, almost, of just building trust, building friendships, building relationships, and people mostly go where their community and culture goes. Also, just know, building a kind of pro message for the other side for Democrats is not that popular right now. Democrats are incredibly unpopular. So find other ways, find their issue, find ways for them to address their issue. Maybe find down ballot issues they are excited to turn out for, and then they will vote against Trump up ballot. Just be creative in that, just because I know like there are a lot of very valid frustrations with institutional Washington as it is, and with Schumer and Jeffries at the head of the Democratic Party. Not a lot of people are rushing to go be a Democrat, even if they're now disgusted by what Trump's been up to. And so be realistic with your goals, I'd say, with those folks as well.
Yeah. Well, we have another comment here from Ken Gilbert, who says, Xander, question for Miles. How about a shout out encouraging any Virginians who have not already done so to vote tomorrow? So, Xander, I will make that shout out.
Shout it out
on behalf of Ken Gilbert. If you don't know and you live in Virginia, there's something very crucial you need to vote on by the end of the day tomorrow, which is a ballot measure in Virginia to temporarily redistrict Virginia to level the playing field. What do we mean by level the playing field? Well, you probably recall last year that Donald Trump instigated a nationwide move by Republican states to gerrymander their states to squeeze a few more seats out of the U.S. Congress for Republicans so that he would be less likely for his party to lose in the midterms. He got Texas and a number of other states to basically do off-cycle redistricting. What do I mean by off-cycle? Well, every 10 years, there's a census in this country, and that census usually leads every state to say, all right, we recounted our people. We got a different number of people. Let's redraw the lines. Some states, they do it in a nonpartisan way. In a lot of states, they re-gerrymander the lines. Well, Donald Trump said, do it now. Don't wait till the next census. I need more seats. I need Republicans to destroy districts that Democrats have been winning, turn them into red districts, give me more seats. And you know what, Xander? This is one place I'm amazed by the Democratic Party, because I have not had a lot of good things to say about that brand in being so slow to stand up to Donald Trump in the way the party is needed to. But on gerrymandering, the response was swift from coast to coast, from California to Virginia. It was, okay, two can play at that game. But here's what's interesting about what's happening in Virginia is we don't want to get into a gerrymandering war. We agree that gerrymandering is not good for this country. We don't want to just keep drawing bluer and bluer districts and redder districts and then have a nation that's permanently divided and no competitive elections. So Virginia has said, we're going to do this temporarily. We're going to do it until I think it's 2029, so that as long as Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans are trying to rig elections in their favor, we're going to redraw the lines in Virginia to level that playing field. And then it's going to reset in a few years. I thought that was very interesting and very important to build in that sort of snapback
sunset
mechanism, is to say, you know what, gerrymandering is bad, but we also can't just let you guys destroy our democracy. And so much so that one of the big foes of gerrymandering, former President Barack Obama, has been actively campaigning for folks in Virginia to get out there and vote yes on this measure to level the playing field and make fair districts. So if you're in Virginia, hopefully you get out there and you vote tomorrow, and I'll be doing the same.
Right on. Yeah, California, I think, did the same. I think California also had this sunset clause when they tried to gerrymander. I got some good news on good authority that also a lot of the gerrymandering that Trump instigated was based on kind of bad math, because he was assuming the political calculus would stay right around where it has been through his 3 elections. As we've seen in the special elections, that's not true. And so in some places, he might have thought he was picking up a couple districts, but what he really did is put all of the districts at risk if things keep going in the kind of way we've seen in these special elections. So also, their kind of authoritarian, grab for these districts in their gerrymandering effort might backfire. And that would be wonderful to see if it happens.
It sure would. Boy, that falls in the category of karma, does it not, my friend?
Yeah, pretty squarely.
That is karma. Well, listen, friends, that's all the time we have for the day. Let me just repeat something that I said at the top if you weren't with us. Join us this Wednesday, because I'll keep reminding folks every single week on Wednesdays, We don't just talk about the news. We do something about the news, and not just the news, specifically about the Trump administration's abuses of power and their efforts to dismantle the guardrails of our democracy. We're going to do something about it this week. We have an announcement on an issue that our members at defiance.org have been very focused on, have been passionate about, and have been doing quite a bit about. And so I hope you will join us at Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern to hear that announcement. And if you feel so inspired before then to become a member of defiance.org to help support efforts to actually push back every single week against these threats to our democracy, then just go to our website, defiance.org, take a look. And please, if you're already a part of the Club for Courageous Americans, share this with others. Get the word out there. We've been able to do an extraordinary amount in just 6 months. And I will say, Xander, we have that special announcement to make next week that we will be celebrating our 6-month birthday as an organization. We have been around just less than half a year and already have done amazing things to fund constitutional lawsuits against Donald Trump, to protect whistleblowers, to push back against illegal orders, to shut down these secret prisons around the country, to support the protests on the front lines in Minneapolis. I could go on and on. Every single week, we've done something substantive to go out there and protect our democracy. So anyway, that was my long exhortation for folks to join us on Wednesdays. Andrew, maybe you have a pithier way to persuade people.
No, most 6 months are just babbling their first words, and we're out here defeating authoritarianism. I'm very proud of us. If I seemed especially chipper today, it's because I've been working on what we're announcing on Wednesday. It is so awesome. I haven't been as excited for an announcement and a mission briefing since maybe the fight against federal overreach, since the DA coalition that we helped launch in February, I believe. This is, to me, as exciting as that and its potential and our ability to punch back against authoritarianism. And so I'll double down with what Miles is saying. You want to be a member by Wednesday. You will have wanted to fund this effort that's coming up. You'll have wanted to get the cool badge that you get that says you are a part of making sure this thing is out there in the universe. I certainly love my badges. So really, if you've been thinking about it for a while, but you haven't done it yet, get in there. You can get in for whatever price you'd like. You can be a member for $1 a month. We'd prefer 10. We really prefer 20 or 30 if you can do it. But just get in there and be a member this week. You're gonna want to say you are part of funding this effort. I'm so excited to share it with you in a couple days.
Amen. Totally agree, my friend. And we've got a whole bunch of great things in the pipeline to protect this country. This is a nonprofit built by you all. And I am just I continue to be very, very amazed by the messages we get, the ideas we get from folks. And this idea that's going to be announced Wednesday partly had its genesis, Xander, and some of those things we heard in our monthly member meeting month before last about people who really wanted to do something about this issue. And so, we're creating another mechanism that can help keep this administration in check.
I'm trying to recall exactly what the poll was, but I believe it was protect the election and then do something about this as the number two issue.
That's right. That's right. And that's what we're doing. You guys are our bosses. So we're taking that action. That's all we have for today. Thank you everyone for joining another episode of Defiance Daily. We're going to make this a great week. We're going to find good news amidst the chaos. We're going to empower y'all to get out there and take action and fight these psychopaths. We're going to hang together until this guy is out of here. And in the meantime, we will defy him. So thank you for your support. Thank you for checking out defiance.org. And as I always say, stay loud, stay brave, and stay together. We'll see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern.